Perhaps we should start 7 minutes past 9, so perhaps we just want to make sure we keep to our schedule today. So, first of all, if you can take our seats the next couple of minutes, that'll be great. So I'm Kunal Sen, the director of UNU-WIDER. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the 2025 WIDER Development Conference, Safeguarding Tomorrow, Innovative Approaches to Growth and Equity. We're delighted to host this conference in Helsinki, where UNU-WIDER began its journey 40 years back. This year's theme could not be more timely. Across the globe, governments are grappling with shrinking fiscal space, rising inequality, and a cascade of shocks from climate disasters and violent conflict to the lingering consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. In such a context, investing in forward-looking, inclusive development approaches is not just important, it is imperative. That is why social protection is at the heart of this conference. It is not only about protecting the vulnerable today, but also about safeguarding tomorrow, ensuring that people and societies have the resilience to face shocks and the opportunity to thrive. It supports inclusive growth, narrows inequalities, and helps lay the foundation for more equitable futures. In this sense, social protection is both a shield and a springboard, a way to protect what we have and to build better. We will also reflect on the critical question of financing. The conference features discussions on innovative ways to finance social protection systems, a particularly relevant topic as the international community prepares for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Sevilla. In this light, I want to express our sincere thanks to the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD, whose support through our domestic revenue mobilization program has made this conference possible. Social protection has long been a part of UNU-WIDER's work. In 1991, we published Social Security in Developing Countries, co-edited by Ehtesam Ahmed, Jean Dres, John Hills, and Ahmed Sen, aiming to put the subject of social security firmly on the agenda of development economics research. This work helped lay the intellectual foundations for our ongoing engagement. Copies of the book, sample copies, are available outside for you to take a look at. Today, the legacy continues through initiatives like the South Moat Project, which uses tax benefit microsimulation models to support policy choices, and our research in social assistance in post-conflict recovery. Our recent work with partners in 9 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America explores how diverse models of social protection can better respond to development needs. You're going to hear more about our research on social protection in different sessions for the next 2.5 days in the conference, and I would encourage you to attend those sessions where our research is being presented. This year's conference is special for another reason. UNU-WIDER turns 40. What began as a small institute with a bold vision has become a global hub for development research and a dialogue bringing together scholars, policymakers, and practitioners from different regions of the world, as is reflected in the conference today. At UNU-WIDER, we always believed in the power of shared knowledge. From our early support for hunger and public action, which helped shape the human development discourse, and more concretely, the Human Development Report and the Index, to our current work on inequality, conflict, and domestic resource mobilization, we have championed research that is rigorous, inclusive, and rooted in the global realities, the realities of the Global South. This milestone is not only a moment to reflect on our past, it is an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to open, policy-relevant, and impact-driven knowledge. To mark the occasion, we'd like to share a short video highlighting UNU-WIDER's 40-year journey. Now over to the video. Thank you.
No matter what challenges the world faces, the power of shared knowledge can help overcome them.
What UNU-WIDER does is provide knowledge that can inform policy, change lives.
Its research has provided answers to a variety of crises the world has faced.
It's a development economics institute led by the Global South.
It makes available data that's really creating a global public good that I don't see anyone else doing.
It's 1982, and a group of 24 academics gather at the London School of Economics. On the agenda is the failure of economics to understand and deal with the pressures of the outside world.
Privatization, deregulation, that was the dominant ethic in the advanced countries. For Africa, it was a disaster.
There was a sense that the way we measured economic well-being had to go beyond GDP.
In a word, a wider perspective. One of the founders, Amartya Sen, wrote this name on the wall, and the name stuck.
The way of arriving at WIDER was signifying World Institute Development of Economic Research. Together also implied something more.
Wider in its approach to disciplines that are outside economics, wider in its openness to different approaches to economics, wider in its reach across the Global South.
With a commitment to academic freedom, the institute was officially established in 1984 in Helsinki and opened its doors in 1985. Lal Jayawardena, a Sri Lankan economist and diplomat, was appointed the first director of UNU-WIDER. His dual background showed the new balance that UNU-WIDER was striking.
There were some American economists that described it as wilder while pursuing independent approaches which were not at that point orthodox, but which have since become so.
And one of the biggest issues in the 1980s was famine. Amartya Sen and John Dress wrote WIDER's first book, the groundbreaking Hunger and Public Action.
We made the case for the importance of public action in development.
It challenged conventional ideas about poverty and food security.
They introduced the ethical dimension of economics, a focus on hunger and poverty, on public action, but also on gender and women's rights.
Hunger and public action put UNU-WIDER on the map. It changed the way we thought about, ultimately, the capabilities approach.
Sen's capability approach shifted the focus from simply measuring poverty through income to assessing people's ability to lead lives they value, which started a whole movement in development economics. It changed not only the way WIDER worked, but institutions around the world.
The core ideas of putting the emphasis on capabilities that informed hunger and public action ultimately were the same core set of ideas that inform the human development approach. And that it's what underpins the Human Development Report that is still going on 35 years after that first report in 1990.
In that period, from the late 1980s to the early 1990s, was a really fundamental critique of structural adjustment programs that were implemented by the IMF and the World Bank. And WIDER's critique of structural adjustment had an amazing effect on the way, subsequently, the bank and the fund thought of structural adjustment programs.
I gave a talk at WIDER when I was chief economist of the World Bank, where I attacked the Washington Consensus. You might say I was a little bit of a traitor. It was really helpful having UN-WIDER to support.
As the world changes, so does UNU-WIDER's focus. In the 2000s, new challenges emerged.
In the early 2000s was a growing recognition that inequality was a threat to social cohesion and to economic development.
My predecessor, Andrea Cornia, established the World Income Inequality Database.
In my role at the UN, we use the World Income Inequality Database on a weekly basis. The information used makes an impact on policy. It goes to member states, it goes to the Secretary General, and UNU-WIDER makes a difference through their data.
Around the same period, there was also more and more evidence of conflict emerging in the global south. That program that WIDER started in the 2000s is very much now part of WIDER's work at the current moment.
Currently, 1 in 7 people in the world are affected by violent conflict. We are trying to understand how people live in areas of conflict, how conflict affects them, trying to provide resilience to the most vulnerable populations in the world.
No matter
again,
what
one can see
challenges
the
the
history
world
of the work we
faces,
did on
the
conflict
power of
and how
shared
important it has
knowledge
been
can
over the
help
last 20
overcome
years.
them. By the
What UNU-WIDER does
mid-2000s,
is
WIDER
provide
was
knowledge
already looking
that
into
can inform
issues
policy.
around no matter what challenges the world faces.
The richest 2% of adults own around half of global household wealth.
What UNU-WIDER does is provide knowledge that can inform policy,
of researchers
change
at
lives.
United Nations
Its
University
research has provided answers to a
When
variety of
WIDER's
crises
book
the
on
world
wealth
is
inequality
faced.
launched,
It's a
there was so
development
much attention.
economics institute led by the Global South.
It makes available data that's really creating a global public good that I don't see anyone else doing.
It's 1982, and a group of 24 academics gather at the London School of Economics. On the agenda is the failure of economics to understand and deal with the pressures of the outside world.
Privatization, deregulation.
Predecessor Andrea Cordia established the World Income Inequality Database.
In my role at the UN, we use the World Income Inequality database on a weekly basis. The information used makes an impact on policy. It goes to member states, it goes to the Secretary General, and UNU-WIDER makes a difference through their data.
Around the same period, there was also more and more evidence of conflict emerging in the global south. That program that WIDER started in the 2000s is very much now part of WIDER's work at the current moment.
Currently, 1 in 7 people in the world are affected by violent conflict. We are trying to understand how people live in areas of conflict, how conflict affects them, trying to provide resilience to the most vulnerable populations in the world.
And again, one can see the history of the work we did on conflict and how important it has been over the last 20 years.
By the mid-2000s, WIDER was already looking into issues around inequality.
The richest 2% of adults own around half of global household wealth, while the poorest half hold only 1%. Now that's the finding of researchers at the United Nations University, World Institute for Development Economics Research.
When WIDER's book on wealth inequality launched, there was so much attention that the WIDER website crashed.
It was being released in lots of papers around the world, something like 500 over the course of a day. And we had all these requests for the downloads which were coming in at the same time, something like 25,000 requests during the first 24 hours. This was a new development, a new finding, and that seemed to have struck a chord in the world at that time.
It was a figure that inspired protest movements around the world. And following the financial crisis, austerity. With tighter budgets and a shift in attitude, bigger questions came up like, does aid actually work? And as ever, WIDER was there to do the difficult research to try to find a rigorous answer.
We used every methodology available to study that topic, and we find a surprising consistency around the return to aid. There is a high return to the overall aid effort.
And there were also questions on how poorer countries were going to industrialize in the 21st century. Could they follow the same path, or did they need a new one?
There was a problem of economic growth along with a lack of structural transformation, and productive job creation became a big challenge in these two parts of the world.
Is manufacturing still synonymous with industry? Or might there be a broader range of options that governments can think about to try to promote economic growth and structural change?
In that period, starting from the early 2010 to what we see now currently, UNU-WIDER produced a series of books on structural transformation, informality, job creation, inequality, such as The Developer's Dilemma, Industries Without Smokestacks, The Job Ladder, and so on.
Another key innovation has been the creation of tax databases to support increased tax income, domestic revenue mobilization.
In the 2010s, there were only 4 countries in the world, all in the global north, that provided tax administrative data to researchers. Working with UNU-WIDER, South Africa, a country from the global south, became the 5th.
It's really a breakthrough in terms of trying to understand what is happening.
WIDER has given us the space to work with them, to take credit for the research, and it has been a very different experience to what we have had with other international institutions.
Since then, a number of other developing countries have started making tax administrative data available for policy research, a true innovation.
5 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, none of the data was available, and we come to a point now where we can present our work from multiple countries at international conferences.
Despite being in a small Nordic country, the scope of UNU-WIDER has always been global.
Este programa tem papel estratégico na medida em que, para melhor orientar as políticas nesse sentido de crescimento inclusivo.
It works with local partners, governments and researchers from around the world, often supporting the careers of researchers and civil servants from the global south.
For a developing country, the most important goal you can have is to transform the structure of the economy. In order to do that, you need a lot of knowledge. We are not going to transform Ghana or any other African country without the skills that are required.
Long-term cooperation strengthens our research capacities.
What UNU-WIDER got me to do is asking questions, how does the research relate to policy?
It has held summer and winter schools and sponsored hundreds of research fellows over the last 40 years, many of whom have worked with WIDER for decades.
Enrolling into the UNU-WIDER program was actually a dream fulfilled.
One of the things UNU-WIDER does is facilitating the scholarship of young economists from developing countries. I am one example.
UNU-WIDER's work continues. Recent work includes SDG 8, the need for meaningful work, and a focus on women in work, on climate change and natural resources.
I see UNU-WIDER continuing much of the groundwork that had been laid by previous directors, but also increasing the focus on gender and informality and the sustainable development goals, which I think is so important.
And on innovative ideas that are ahead of the global debate.
This modest proposal for the 21st century, the billionaire tax.
Over the last 40 years, UNU-WIDER has shown its ability to co-create knowledge that has the power to improve policy and improve lives. Now, more than ever, the power of shared knowledge is needed to face the challenges of the next 40 years.
The goal of UNU-WIDER at present is to continue using evidence, using research, harnessing the power of shared knowledge to improve the lives of the most vulnerable.
They played, I think, a powerful role in shaping the discourse, the policy framework in the developing world. And so today, in a world that's clearly more uncertain, there's even a greater need for this kind of diversity of perspectives.
If you focus on asking the right question, you're opening up fields of inquiry as well as encouraging people to pursue more complicated research.
No matter what challenges the world faces, the power...
Okay, all right. I hope you enjoyed the video, and apologies for the technical glitches there, but I have to thank Kennedy and Kristen for our team fixing it fairly quickly. So now it's my honor to introduce someone who has long championed international cooperation and evidence-based policymaking, Dr. Olli Rehn, the governor of the Bank of Finland. We're deeply grateful to the government of Finland for their unwavering support to UNU-WIDER the past 4 decades. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rehn to the stage. Dr. Rehn, please.
Thank you, Kunal. Dear Director Professor Kunal Sen, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me first of all warmly welcome you to not chilly but cool Helsinki. I hope you take it as a breath of fresh air if you are suffering from a heat wave in other parts of the world. We are still waiting for that. Maybe it arrives during the summer holiday season in July. It is both a great pleasure and honor to join you at this conference marking the 40th anniversary of UNU-WIDER. Since its founding in 1985, WIDER has tackled global development challenges that are vital to prosperity and progress. As we saw from the great video, just how important the work of WIDER has been in terms of widening the perspectives in the field of developmental economics and policy planning, policy making. Let me also thank Kunal and the WIDER team for the interaction between WIDER and the Finnish economist community, both the universities and our BOFIT Institute, the Bank of Finland Institute for Emerging Economies. This interaction and cooperation has greatly improved in recent years, and I very much believe it is to the mutual benefit, and from our side we are more than ready to continue and further develop this cooperation. Today's situation is such that WIDER's work is more essential than ever as we face a world of pervasive uncertainty, structural uncertainty, marked by power politics, geopolitical rifts, trade wars, and regrettably weakened global cooperation, weakened multilateral cooperation. Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine continues, and it threatens food and energy security, while the global goals of sustainable, equitable growth and combating climate change effectively and justly seem increasingly out of reach if we cannot restore multilateral international cooperation. Finland is a proud host of UNU-WIDER, not least because of our own development journey. In the 1950s, we were still a relatively poor, underdeveloped country, still recovering from the harsh experiences of the Second World War, the Winter War and the Continuation War here. Over the past 70 years, we transformed ourselves into a modern Nordic welfare state. This was made possible by strong institutions, good governance, and an education system ensuring equal opportunities. These factors of the Nordic Third Way made our human capital grow and entrepreneurial spirit to thrive. It enabled the building of a welfare state with social protection. And crucially, all this was based on trust and confidence in the society. This brings us to today and going forward. Trust, institutions, and inclusive growth, sustainable growth, are at the very heart of UNU-WIDER's mission. This week we gather here in Helsinki to exchange ideas and share best practices, which is a collective effort to build the trust and capacity needed for long-term development of our countries and societies. Ladies and gentlemen, achieving sustainable and equitable growth requires investment. Yet the investment gap in emerging and developing economies is growing. While the European Union, for instance, is a major aid provider, public funding alone is not sufficient. It's not enough. Private investment, mobilizing private investment is crucial, especially to tackle climate challenges in the Global South, where needs are urgent and technological solutions are vital. Cooperation and knowledge sharing are equally important in the green transition. Thus, we must find sustainable collective solutions to close this investment gap. The Global South, home to most of humanity, must have a strong voice in shaping the policies that affect the Global South and the people living in the countries. Their better inclusion in the global financial and monetary systems is essential, it is critical. Finland, as part of the Nordic-Baltic constituency at the IMF and World Bank, and as an EU member, stands for democracy and fairness in the multilateral system, and we have consistently supported the quota and governance reforms at the IMF and the World Bank group. The European Central Bank, where I'm a member of the Governing Council, also works effectively to foster better international policy coordination in the field of central banking and monetary policy, both in Europe and with the Global South, with the emerging and developing economies. In these times of global fragmentation, we must reaffirm our commitment to international rules-based order. Open trade and the spread of technology are critical. They have been critical to economic success stories among the EMDEs, and they have been also key to Finland's success. We know it by experience. Protectionism and isolation are not answers to uncertainty and fragmentation. They are part of the problem. Now, more than ever, we need global cooperation and multilateralism. To support this, we need independent, high-quality academic research, both in economics and other social sciences, other fields of science. UNU-WIDER's role as a globally respected independent institution is therefore crucial. As a central banker, I want to stress the value of independence and freedom from political pressure when doing research. Sound policy must rest on evidence-based analysis, unbiased research and analysis. Our motto at the Bank of Finland is securing stability in science we trust. That reflects our reliance, our trust on research and evidence-based economic analysis. UNU-WIDER's anniversary theme, the power of our shared knowledge, is equally vital and to the point. Because only by learning from another can we find effective solutions. We cannot succeed in isolation. Dear friends, let me close by congratulating WIDER on 40 years of important, valuable work for global development. May the next 40 years be just as impactful, and may this conference be filled with new ideas, sound dialogue, and shared insight. Together, we can help build a more just and sustainable future for all. So on behalf of the Republic of Finland, you are all warmly welcome to Helsinki and Finland. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Dr. Rain. As you mentioned, we very value the collaboration that we've had with the Bank of Finland for the last few years, especially the Bank of Finland Institute for Emerging Economies. That's been a very productive collaboration. Also, we really value Finland's support to rules-based multilateral system, for an inclusive multilateral system, and also reforms in international financial architecture, which provides stronger voice for low and middle-income countries. We've greatly valued that commitment too. So I'm going to now move on to some housekeeping notes, rather boring, but pretty important. So, and before we go to the first policy panel. So over the next 3 days, we will hear from more than 150 speakers across plenaries, research panels, and special events. This morning we'll open with a high-level policy discussion on reaccelerating poverty reduction and the role of welfare policies. All plenaries will be live-streamed on our YouTube channel, and the WIDER annual lecture, which is on Wednesday morning, will be broadcast on UNTV. The full program is available on our website and displayed throughout the venue. Coffee breaks and tonight's reception will take place in the lobby outside. Lunch will be served at the Marine restaurant on the second floor of this building. The second day dinner, that's tomorrow evening, is for program-listed participants only. You'll be guided there by staff at the lobby of the Scandic Hotel where you're staying at 6:10, or feel free to refer to the map at the registration desk. It's about a 10 minutes walk from here. Please visit our poster sessions and the fireside chats in the Network Cafe, a space for informal exchange and book launches, including the World Social Report 2025, co-authored by our own Patricia Justin, sitting right in front of here. Finally, I warmly invite you to join us on day 3, Wednesday morning, for the WIDER Annual Lecture 29. To be delivered by the Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee. We speak on a topic central to this conference: how can we close the gap between the promise and the practice of social protection? If you need any assistance during the conference, please feel free to approach a team member at the registration desk or anyone wearing a badge with the UNU-WIDER affiliation. Thank you again for being here and for being part of the conversation. We now move on to the first policy plenary. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Haroon Bhorat from the Development Policy Research Unit in South Africa. So hopefully you are all, like me, intellectually inspired by this morning, in particular the video. I was thinking through the video, and for me what describes UNU-WIDER after 40 years is probably its role in intellectual creative destruction in a good way, in pushing sort of the frontiers of development economics. So I am suitably inspired, but I think you are going to be inspired by the panelists we have this morning. You would have noticed from Kunal's reflections this morning about the conference that I think the analytical spine for the conference is social protection and welfare policies and its role in reducing poverty and inequality. And I think we have an excellent panel to kick off that discussion. It would be remiss of me in the mini role I have to act as the chair in not providing very, very brief reflections on what I think are the broad themes around social protection that I know our panelists will pick up on. I mean, why it's important is that, just under a third of the planet is subject to, in a good way, some form of social protection. So the idea that you've got 2.5 billion people that are receiving some sort of social assistance, school feeding schemes, public works programs, and so on, emphasizes its central role in thinking about economic development. For me, there are five big topics that I think are really relevant in social protection that I think we need to think about, and I know our panelists will pick up on. First is the idea of building basic infrastructure. I don't think we think about that enough, from biometric systems to statistical agencies and their role in particularly low-income country contexts. Second, the idea that macro matters, that whether we like it or not, fiscal policy and the constraints that are posed in the pursuit of social protection will matter at some point, particularly in low-growth environments that the governor spoke about this morning. Thirdly, the types of programs are relevant, whether we're talking about social assistance or asset programs or tax incentives or insurance. I don't think we think enough about insurance, at least outside of Latin America. Types of programs matter. The fourth that us as economists love a lot because the data behaves and it answers our instinctive question, which is targeting. So does the program have the intended outcome? Are there leakages in the system? Do conditionalities work? What about universality versus specific programs? And the final one is impacts, right? So can we show whether you've seen specific labor supply effects or poverty and inequality effects or asset poverty going down in particular programs? For me, those are the big five themes that I think our panelists will reflect on. And the panelists have been, in the background, very well behaved because they all agreed not to have PowerPoints, and that was the directive from UNU-WIDER. And what they also agreed to is that I would not read their illustrious bios because that takes away from their valuable speaking time. So please look through the bios of our speaking lineup. And what we will do is offer each speaker, and you're welcome to sit at the podium, sit at the chairs here or up to the podium, 10 minutes of reflections, and then we will go to the audience for Q&A. I will introduce all the speakers and then hand over to each of them. So our first speaker is Luis Felipe López-Calva, who's Global Director for Poverty and Equity at the World Bank. Our second speaker, right next to me, is Aruna Roy, who's the founding member for Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which is, for those of you who don't know, the union for power of laborers and farmers. Guy Standing is the Professorial Research Associate at the SOAS, School for Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Claudia Robles is a Social Affairs Officer at ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. So welcome. Deepak Nayyar, of course, is Professor Emeritus of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So with that illustrious panel, I'm going to hand over to Luis Felipe for his input. Thanks, Luis.
Thank you very much, Haroon, and I want to start just by reiterating how much of a privilege it is to be here. WIDER has been very present throughout my career, first as a student and as an academic, later as an international public official. I had the opportunity to spend some time here as a visiting scholar, and I had a great time in Helsinki and in WIDER doing research, so has been very present throughout my career. So it's a very, very real privilege to be part of this opening panel. So thank you to all the whole team in WIDER. And right now, actually, we have also very good collaboration between the World Bank and WIDER, and I can mention this when I refer to some of the work that we are doing. So I want to start with some facts. We launched last week the update of the poverty numbers, the global monitoring that we have the mandate to do global poverty monitoring. So last week we updated the numbers, and basically we changed according to the methodology that was suggested also by the Atkinson Commission. We changed the poverty lines and we updated the numbers. And I don't want to give a lot of figures, just to say that 1 in every 10 people in the world are living in extreme poverty. And 3 main key messages emerge from the update. One is that a very important number, 1.5 billion people have been lifted out of poverty since 1990, which is a very important message to give, because a lot has been achieved in terms of poverty reduction. Second, that unfortunately we're off track to achieve SDG 1, so we will definitely not be able to eliminate poverty by 2030. The prediction, if we continue with the current prediction, we will be around 9% of the global population will be in poverty by 2030. And the third and very important message is that poverty, extreme poverty in the world, is now very much concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa and countries that are fragile or affected by conflict, which makes the challenge even more complicated. So these are the facts. But then what is associated to processes of poverty reduction that have been successful? And I would like to summarize it with three ideas. So, or what we call the priorities, right, in the bank. And we would call it grow, invest, and insure. So first, create the conditions for economic growth, which is always associated with processes of poverty reduction. We can think of, it was mentioned before, Finland as a great example of long-term success. The 2 ideas in terms of growth, one is the idea that institutions are the backbone of any economy to be able to grow. And then we have what we can call the circulatory system, which allows ideas and resources to flow. So we have energy, infrastructure, and digitalization. Those are priorities, right? So cleaner energy, financial intermediation more than financial inclusion, because we see, for example, in Guatemala, 35% of the population say they have a bank account, but only 7% say that they use it for savings or for borrowing, right? So you have to go beyond financial inclusion. It's financial intermediation, which is very limited in developing countries. And finally, as I said, digitalization that is going to allow more opportunities to more people. So conditions for growth. Second is invest, and that is the non-monetary dimensions of poverty. So investing in universal public education, public health, all those things that have to be at the foundation of any process of economic growth with equal opportunities. So that's the investment part. So grow, invest, and finally insure, not last but not least, insure in the sense social protection systems that allow people to cope with shocks, idiosyncratic and systemic shocks. But very important that the social protection systems, and this is the main issue of this conversation, have to be fiscally sustainable, truly universal, and sometimes the targeting can be an instrument to make the systems inclusive. Targeting is a way to bring people that are excluded into the system. So have to be fiscally sustainable, truly universal, and growth friendly. And a lot of This, Santiago Levy's here. Many people have written about how to make the social protection systems also an instrument for economic inclusion and economic growth. So I would leave it here for now. So the processes that have been successful in eliminating poverty have these three elements: grow, invest, and insure, in the sense that I just mentioned, and I can elaborate further as we continue the conversation. Thank you.
Can I be seen? Thank you very much for inviting us to be here today. To Kunal, who persisted that I come. So thank you for your persistence that I should be here. I represent a workers' organization in India which managed to work with other organizations to spearhead one of the most important programs and laws for employment in India. At a time when the whole world was reacting to right to work as a concept, India managed to pass a law, which is basically a right to work law. When I begin, I'm going to just talk about the scale of India, because it's really enormous. We're 1/6 of the globe. So anything you say about India has to be, it can't be local and specific. Though I come from a very local organization, continue to live in the village, continue to work with poor people, women and men, and to work with them intimately day to day, I still think scale and making contact with a large number of people is very important. So let's say I'm going to give you figures of the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, passed in 2005, ensuring that every household in rural India would be entitled to 100 days' work as a guarantee. It was a huge promise, and it was fulfilled by the United Progressive Alliance, the government that was in power in 2005. Last year's active workers in Manrega have been 118.8 million people, households, more than 20 times Finland's population. The households benefited last year were 95.3 million. The person days of work generated last year were 471 million work days. The total expenditure on wages last year was $8.84 billion US. The number of assets created since inception in 2005, 91.1 million. So though I come from a workers and peasants organization, I represent a campaign and a law and a program and a project that represents millions of Indians. I was also very happy to see Amartya and Jean on the screen, because they were part, and Jean was very much a part of the making of the law, and he and Nikhil Dey, who's also here, were very much part of making the law. And Amartya was consulted from time to time about many things that happened, and Joseph Stiglitz came later on to say that this was a very good program, and perhaps one of the best anti-poverty programs in the world. He made a statement in Bangalore. So I was glad to see their faces today and to hear them. Let me begin by saying that every village I've been to, and I've traveled widely in India, and I go from village to village, the poor are distressed by hunger and poverty, but what they ask for as a solution to their poverty and hunger is not a dole. They don't ask for grain. They may ask for it in a crisis, but they ask for employment. And I was struck by the fact that no matter where I went, they wanted employment. So the evolution of the MGNREGA is based on people's articulation. Over and over again, and India is a very large country with 22 languages. Fortunately, I'm a South Indian who lives in North India, married a East Indian, so I have some language skills. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to understand what people said to me at all. But people did say they wanted work. They demanded, too, that there should be an entitlement to a law. They were fed up with schemes that one government brought in and the next government rescinded because of political differences, and we know how polarities work in politics. So somebody comes, starts a program, the next government comes and puts it aside. So they wanted an entitlement and a law that no succeeding government could set aside. And I think this was an extremely important thing for us, that we have a legislation and a justiciable legislation to look at the basic problems that we faced as poor people, which is migration, which is poverty, which is inability to stay in the village, to send our children to school, and so many others. We also felt that one great example had already existed in India. In the 1970s, the state of Maharashtra in India had passed something called the Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Scheme. And that should have been really taken up by political parties as well as workers' organizations to ask for demand for the right to employment all over the country, but it didn't quite happen that way. So that became a kind of basic draft on which we worked. The demand for NREGA actually was revived when we started, the MKSS, the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, started the demand for a transparency law in 1994. We asked for transparency of records on a work site. And a work site is a public work site. And we found that we couldn't access any of the documents. The muster roll, which is the labor list, the bills and vouchers where people are paid money, and they were always cheated. So the two aspects of it, we wanted transparency, to fight for our rights, also to fight corruption and the arbitrary use of power. And when the NREGA actually got passed as a law, then we insisted that there should be justiciable, as I said, justiciable points to the law. And I won't go through the list, but importantly, we do have not only the right to 100 days wages, we have the right to a job card, and within 15 days of demand for work, if we are not given work, we are entitled to an unemployment allowance. And millions of rupees have already been claimed and paid to workers for the bureaucratic inefficiency and the inefficiency of the government for not providing work. Apart from that, people can plan their works, they plan their works, and the worksite facilities are all provided. And as a woman and working with women workers, a worksite facility is extremely important, whether you have a creche or water or all that, that was also provided. So we went into many of the details, which normally laws don't, but we went into the details of that. More importantly, as an Indian, for me, it was very important to see that this brought in the concept of people participating in policy making. So not only receivers of what we thought they should be doing and tell us what was going wrong, critique implementation, but actually look at the making of policy. And it was amazing how much true knowledge, sense, and good ideas came from the people. So the idea of participatory governance became an important part of the debate. And in the early 2000s, in 2005, many laws were passed by the Parliament in India, apart from the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which was passed because of a 12-year struggle. The right to information law was passed because of another 12-year struggle. The right to forest rights for people in the forest was passed, and many other laws were passed, and we call them the rights-based legislations. So welfare, unless it becomes a right, we are not able to access it in India. Because welfare is in the hands of the bureaucracy and the government, and we all know how they function. Most of them are corrupt, most of them are slow, and the real right and the access to basic living, which the people should get, just somehow gets aborted. So we put in the right to information components into the NREGA. Therefore, there were all kinds of rights to access the information, but also to conduct a public audit of the works beyond the financial audit. So in the NREGA, workers could access the information and put it in front of people. Now, the Indian Constitution has a chapter called the Directive Principles of State Policy, but it has never been justiciable. The rights-based legislations have made them justiciable. This whole battle has not ended with the MGNREGA. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that in continuing this process of agitation, we have got our teeth into democratic rights for people, strengthen Indian democracy, And we've had in recent years in Rajasthan many kinds of acts passed, and I won't go through the list just now, but we have also looked at the new relationship between the worker in contract. Now, today, the worker is no longer on employment. They are all on contract. So we've drafted and passed 2 gig workers laws, one in Rajasthan and one in the state of Karnataka, which looks towards a new formation of what can be done for workers. I want to say that governance is not just a matter of welfare for people. It's not just a matter of getting that water or getting that school or getting that right. It's also the right to be able to stand in front of a government and question its impunity to answer questions. And the most important thing that we have got as a result of these laws, that we can question their impunity. And ultimately, any law passed in India should contain the seeds of the ability to question the system and speak truth to power, which MGNREG has done in ample proportion. I hope we have time to talk about the details. I've gone through it, and for people who come from different parts of the world, it might sound strange or it might sound like a wish list, but it's actually happened in India. So thank you very much for putting up with me.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. And of course, when we're celebrating anniversaries, we should be reflecting on a journey that we've been taking. And I think it's important that we must remember that WIDER came into being at the time of an economics revolution in the world, when the Mont Pelerin Society suddenly became the new gurus, and they fostered a new economics in the 1980s. And as it happens, it coincided in my own life with the realization that the welfare states of the post-1945 era were yesterday. They were due to decline along with social democracy, which was suddenly put on the defensive. And at the time, a small group of us set up a network called BIEN, which we called at the time Basic Income European Network. But because so many people were joining from developing countries, we became BIEN, with the E changed to Earth. And the journey has been alongside the journey that WIDER and other organizations have followed. And I think it's very important in our discussions to realize that we have been on something like a global transformation, a disembedded phase of that transformation, using Karl Polanyi's term, in which we have seen a multiplication of insecurities, a multiplication of inequalities, and a morphing of their original ideology into a system of rentier capitalism, where more and more of the income is flowing to the owners of property, financial property, intellectual property, and physical property, and less has been flowing to those who rely on labor and work for their income. And I think this global transformation has resulted in the creation of a new global class structure, which should be informing all our discussions. I wrote a book in 2011 called The Precariat. And in that book, on page 1, I said, unless the needs and insecurities of the precariat are addressed by policymakers, we will see the emergence of a political monster and a politics of inferno. In November 2016, I received a deluge of emails from around the world saying, your monster has arrived. Today, we have what is in effect a plutarchy in the United States, ruled by the super wealthy in the interests of the super wealthy. And you're seeing this mirrored in different ways in developing countries, in European countries, and all over the world. And we're seeing a weakening of multilateral institutions, multilateral agendas of the subjects that we're talking about in this conference. And I think we've reached the Karl Polanyian crisis moment when we have two possibilities. The first possibility is a shift into a dark night of authoritarianism and neo-fascism. And the alternative is a new phase of a double movement in which society embeds the economy with new systems of regulation, redistribution, and social protection. And I think this is the context in which we should be discussing these issues. I remind you that in 1942, a man who was to become influential in the establishment of post-war welfare states and a sort of developmental rationale alongside that, William Beveridge, he said, "This is a time for revolutions, not for patching." I believe we're at a similar moment today. I want to just mention the three dimensions of the precariat, which in many countries now it probably accounts for 40%, 50%, some of my friends tell me in different countries, of the population. Suffering from insecurities, unstable labor, having to do a lot of work that doesn't get counted as work, having to rely on volatile incomes, living on the edge of unsustainable debt, where one mistake, one illness, one disaster catapults them into homelessness, suicidal tendencies, and so on. And millions of people, not just migrants, not just minorities, losing the rights of citizenship, losing civil rights, social rights, political rights, and in the process becoming supplicants, relying on discretionary decisions by bureaucrats, by charities, by landlords, by moneylenders, by parents, or some other group. This is the situation that we're facing. But in addition, we have a permanent sense of living in a polycrisis moment, where natural disasters, conflicts, other forms of financial disasters are plunging the world into a system of chronic uncertainty. As you all know, for an economist, uncertainty is different from risk. You cannot insure against uncertainty, unknown unknowns, as the famous saying goes. We're living in an era where Nassim Taleb's idea of black swans have become a bevy of swans, in which we're affected by shocks at any time. Systemic shocks which could affect all of us, or any of us. And in such a context, the talk of targeting is outdated, because millions of people could be hit by a shock, and you cannot have a social protection system based on social assistance and ex-post compensation schemes, as Beveridge and others had designed. In that context, too, we have an ecological disaster that's threatening us with extinction. We have global conflict, and we have a battle between a declining rentier state led by an evil set of people against a rising rentier state in China. That is the background in which we will see a lot of geopolitical conflict. Now, what I've emphasized in my own work is that we have lost a sense of robustness. We have lost a sense in which we are immune to shocks and the hazards that we face. And we've also seen a weakening of resilience, the ability to cope with shocks, the ability to recover from shocks. And as a result, when shocks hit, the consequences both at personal level and at community level and at society level are much greater. And in that context, we have seen that populism spreads. The appeal of populism is such because the populists promise some sort of certainty, return to the past in some sense. And the biggest imperative for social protection today is to protect against people veering to support these evil characters. That, I think, is the background for a new discussion of what I've been proposing for the past 40 years, moving towards the creation of an anchor of basic income in every society. And I would like to remind us that the arguments for a basic income are fundamentally ethical, not instrumental. They are about common justice. They're about freedom, enhancing freedom, liberal freedom, the freedom to be moral, the freedom to make rational choices. And they're also about giving people basic security. Basic security is a human need. We all need basic security, not total security. And we know from psychologists and economists that if people are insecure, their mental bandwidth shrinks and their capacity to make rational decisions shrinks. Their capacity to take entrepreneurial risk shrinks. I've only got 1 minute, I think, yes? So what I would like to conclude with is by saying that over the last 20 years, I've had the privilege to be involved in doing pilots, first in Africa, then in India, now in Brazil, been involved in Finland, the first country, industrialized country to operate a basic income pilot. And there are over 100 such pilots and experiments ongoing at the moment. All the methodologies, all the things that we can criticize are valid, but there is one thing that comes across. Each and every type of experiment results in improvements in mental health, improvements in schooling, in nutrition, in women's status, in improvements in work. More work, not less. Just in case you didn't hear that, more work, not less. And in that context, it gives people a greater sense of altruism, tolerance of the other, and strengthens social solidarity. It's not a panacea. It must be seen as part of a generalized transformational agenda. And it can be paid for. And I never thought I would live to the day. 1 week ago, a man in our network was elected president of his country with a promise of introducing a basic income, and I wish him well. Thank you very much.
Hello? Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Haroon, and fellow panelists. I would like to start by thanking UNU-WIDER through its directors, Kunal Sen, for the invitation made to ECLAC to be here this morning. It's an immense honor to be here with you. And I would like to share with you in these few minutes, because I know I have to be very short, some of the reflections on Latin American experience in reducing poverty, and also our proposals from ECLAC, yes, to reaccelerate poverty and inequality reduction. And hoping that hopefully this will be useful for other regions as well. Latin America has implemented several policy efforts to reduce poverty during the last decades. It has progressively established a level of agreement on the role of welfare policies for development, despite the challenges of a very heterogeneous political landscape, and that's very relevant. While poverty was 51% in 1990, in 2023 it was 27%. Just 3 years after the pandemic, and this was the lowest level of poverty recorded. This represents a reduction of 25 percentage points in 35 years, which is considerable, but still a long time. What have we learned from this process? In the first place, I think it's important to assert that there is a strong correlation, and our experience shows that there is a strong correlation between increasing social spending and poverty reduction. For instance, in 2015, central government social spending reached around 11% of GDP and was increased during crisis. And also it's important to realize that during the pandemic, social spending reached its peak at about 14% of GDP. Counter-cyclical social spending has been crucial to prevent further increases in poverty, and that's very relevant. In the second place, we have learned about the role of political economy and also the strengthening of social institutional frameworks. Institutions matter to implement multi-sector policy initiatives. Actually, the countries that have achieved lowest rates of poverty are those that have increased social investment in social sectors, key social sectors, but that have also implemented coexisting policy instruments to expand both contributory and non-contributory social protection policies, installing a know-how within the state that has been crucial to improving policies' effectiveness. In the first place, our region has 2 decades of history of implementing innovative non-contributory social protection policies, such as conditional and unconditional cash transfers, non-contributory pension systems, in-kind policies such as school meals, and comprehensive early childhood development policies. Efforts to increase contributory coverage have been also very relevant through social insurance mechanisms, through structural pension reforms, and also, for instance, efforts to introduce the monotax. And exploration and insights on some of these policy instruments are quite relevant, just to realize how important is the design of policies. For instance, in the case of cash transfers, mostly conditional, but also some unconditional, in 2022, they covered 27% of the population in the region, accounted for an investment of 0.26% of GDP. Yet their low amounts show a barrier to eradicate poverty. According to our estimations from ECLAC, they only covered 47% of poor households per capita income deficit. So there is much room for improvement, also considering the large gaps that we have in covering and advancing towards universal social protection. On the other hand, non-contributory pension systems have become a major milestones in building social protection systems in our region. Their coverage among the persons aged 65 years and over have increased from 3% to 31% in 2022, in 2 decades. And they accounted for 0.42% of GDP. It's a very interesting movement that actually has moved towards universal non-contributory pension systems or quasi-universal in at least 5 countries in the region. So it has set a standard for other countries to increase coverage. And actually they have had important effects, as long as we know so far, in poverty reduction among older persons. But yet it is worth considering once again that it is contributory pensions that led to deeper poverty reductions among these groups. And this calls for a greater coordination between contributory and non-contributory policy instruments once again. So what is required to ensure that we do not spend another 35 years trying to eradicate poverty in our region? Well, in the first place, at ECLAC we have argued that expanding the social protection systems and expanding the welfare state must be one of the 11 transformations required to address structural challenges in the development model. This means that we need a multi-sectoral approach and not one just based on, for instance, conditional cash transfer or cash transfers that are always recalled in our experience. We have made a strong call to strengthen social protection systems that are universal, that are integrative, that are sustainable, and that are resilient. And resilience, as we just heard, is very important in social protection systems. Resilience implies that systems should not merely react to crisis, but must enhance policies' capacity for preparedness, prevention, mitigation, and adaptation. And we are experiencing several ongoing crises, but we are also experiencing parallel transformations in the world of work, technological transformation and demographic transition, increasing violence, and of course the climate crisis, all in parallel. So that is giving account of what we are calling at the ECLAC a risk structure in the process of reconfiguration that will condition the future of social protection, might increase vulnerability, and might increase inequalities. Strengthening policy design for resilience is so very, very important. And again, this context requires a set of strategic actions to strengthen the development of human capabilities and labor inclusion along income protection. Despite the relevance of policy efforts, we know that labor income is the one leading to lower, and this is the last one, to lower poverty levels in our region. So we need to improve integrative design of income protection policies and labor inclusion policies together, with a focus on increasing formalization and access to contributory social protection. This is also crucial to supporting workers in the transition to an environmentally sustainable economy and green jobs, and it is equally important to strengthen digital social protection and promote digital inclusion. We need to promote synergies between income protection and measures in the education and health policies that are necessary to improve human capacity development. The levels of sufficiency and coverage in contributory and non-contributory, cash transfers is crucial, and this can be done through a gradual, well-planned expansion to guarantee universal access in the extremes, at least in the extremes of the life cycle. Eradicating poverty demands ensuring necessary financial resources to deal with this task. We have made a call to establish a standard for public investment in non-contributory social protection to end poverty. According to our estimations for the region, this could stand between 1.5 and 2.5% of GDP to invest in such programs. And of course, based on the experience of the welfare states, robust welfare states and Nordic societies, improving current conditions for early childhood development policies and expanding care policies is equally important. Providing certainty in the current context through robust social protection systems is a vital investment in our times that will contribute to reducing poverty, inequality, and increasing social cohesion. But it will also improve and strengthen democracy and stability. Many persons around the world have their primary contact with the state through social protection policies, which represent a key means by which the state reaches and engages with communities. Forums such as this one and the Second World Summit for Social Development presents a unique opportunity to expand consensus on the role of extending social protection and multilateralism in this quest, and hopefully build a pact for inclusive social development that can be able to eradicate poverty for all. Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues. I'd like to thank at the outset WIDER for the invitation to be here and congratulate WIDER for its amazing contribution to our knowledge and understanding of development over the past 40 years. May I wish it the very best for the next 40 years. In my presentation, I would like to develop two simple propositions. First, employment that provides livelihoods for individuals and yields incomes for their households is the only sustainable means of accelerating poverty reduction. Second, welfare policies are essential in performing a supporting role when the incidence of poverty is high, but transfer payments in perpetuity are not a sustainable solution in the long run. In both, whether poverty reduction or welfare policies, the macroeconomic context and macroeconomic policies are critical, and that is my focus. Economic theory and history both suggest that surplus labor, when absorbed in productive employment, is a critical source of economic growth in the early stages of development. And if economic growth is to be transformed into meaningful development, which improves the well-being of people, employment that provides livelihoods is the only sustainable means of reducing and ultimately eradicating poverty. In most countries, at low levels of income and in earlier stages of development, which are capital scarce, there is surplus labor that is underemployed, irrespective of the endowment of land or natural resources. Hence, their most abundant resource is underutilized. Macroeconomics in developing countries is at least in part about mobilizing and creating resources, not only financial resources, but also real resources for development. Employment creation can both mobilize and create resources. It constitutes resource mobilization beyond financial resources, which are the usual concern of macroeconomics, in as much as it mobilizes the most abundant yet underutilized resource, people, for development. The absorption of surplus labor and employment, then, is an important source of economic growth. It constitutes resource creation insofar as it increases the productivity of labor for any given level of technological development, introducing another source of economic growth. The same people who constitute resources on the supply side provide markets on the demand side in the process of development. This interactive causation, which is a potential source of economic growth, is possible, but not automatic or assured. It may not materialize if employment opportunities are not created or are not sufficient. Thus, employment matters as a driver of economic growth, and if economic growth is to be transformed into meaningful development, employment creation is essential insofar as it provides income opportunities. Given this reality, many governments in developing countries have discovered the idea of inclusive growth. Some of it is just populist rhetoric. In a few countries, governments in search of political legitimacy set aside resources for the poor, often in terms of allocations for social sectors or public services and or direct income support. But the bottom line, I believe, cannot change. Any process of economic growth is poor if and only if it creates employment and provides sufficient incomes to lift people out of poverty. The moral of the story is clear. There are no trade-offs between job creation and output growth, so that it is misleading to present it as an either-or choice. In fact, there are strong complementarities between employment creation and economic growth. Growth can create jobs, and jobs can drive growth. Indeed, the two can reinforce each other through an interaction between the supply side and the demand side to create a virtuous circle of cumulative causation. Put simply, wages are costs on the supply side, but incomes on the demand side, or in a more complex dynamic relationship as embodied in the Kaldor-Verdun law, the cumulative causation. Thus, a focus on employment as the primary objective rather than as a residual outcome is absolutely essential. Conventional thinking seeks to focus on GDP growth at a macro level and productivity growth at a micro level. There is perhaps a more useful way of thinking about GDP growth directly in terms of employment growth. The growth of employment and the growth in labor productivity, measured as output per worker, together add up to the growth in GDP. If the employment growth rate is increased by 1%, the GDP growth rate would also increase, provided labor productivity does not fall by 1% or more. In other words, if it is possible to raise the employment growth rate without inducing an equivalent or greater reduction in labor productivity growth, the growth rate of the economy can only be higher. It should thus be possible, I believe, to focus on employment growth as an objective. Now, my second proposition: in countries where absolute poverty is widespread, social safety nets or welfare policies which require transfer payments might and do mitigate the situation in the short term. In a longer term perspective, as I said, employment that provides livelihoods is the only sustainable means of reducing and ultimately eradicating poverty. Now, it is essential to recognize, and that's the heart of my message, that both, whether welfare policies or poverty reductions, the macroeconomic sphere is absolutely critical. Macroeconomic objectives and policies have distributional implications and social consequences. Indeed, macroeconomics has profound implications for the well-being of people. The living standards of people depend upon their private incomes and public entitlements. Thus, if we abstract from savings, private income which supports private consumption in turn depends on employment levels for those in the world of work and social protection for those who are unemployed or underemployed. The level of employment and the degree of social protection provided by welfare policies are both determined in the sphere of macroeconomics. Public entitlements which support social consumption or welfare policies that support private consumption depend upon the magnitude of resources made available by governments for the public provision of services such as healthcare and education, and for welfare policies that provide income support. Now, for any government or its Ministry of Finance, this depends on resource availability or fiscal flexibility in the exchequer. In my view, it is very difficult to find resources for welfare policies and almost impossible to resolve the employment problem without rethinking macroeconomic policies that have in fact accentuated the problem. Such rethinking must begin by redefining policy objectives. In the short term or in crisis situations, the prime concern should not be the stability of prices alone. The stability of output and employment is just as important. In the medium term or in normal times, the essential objectives of macroeconomic policies cannot simply be the management of inflation or the elimination of macroeconomic imbalances. It should be just as much, if not more, about fostering employment creation and supporting economic growth. The rethinking must also extend to reconsidering policy instruments. Fiscal policy cannot be a means of reducing government deficits or restoring macroeconomic balances. It is a powerful instrument in the quest for promoting employment and economic growth. Monetary policy cannot be reduced to a means of controlling inflation through interest rates. It is a versatile instrument where both price and volume of credit can be very effective in achieving development objectives. Now, the obsessive concern about deficits in government finances that border on a fetishism in ministries of finance is misplaced. There is nothing in macroeconomics which stipulates the optimum level to which a fiscal deficit must be reduced as a proportion of GDP. The real issue is the end use in relation to the costs of borrowing. Thus, government borrowing is always sustainable if it is used to finance investment and if the rate of return on such investment is higher than the interest rate payable. And investing in people is also investment. The essential point is that what is efficient for a household at a micro level is not necessarily efficient for the government at a macro level, because the whole is different from the sum total of the parts. Yet, orthodoxy about balanced budgets holds sway. In the developing world, orthodox macroeconomic policies prescribe two essentials. First, in the situations of disequilibrium or crisis, governments should not attempt to protect employment. Instead, governments are urged to accept the pain of adjustment in the form of a lower output today for a higher output tomorrow. This recommendation, in my view, conforms to the strong spring analogy. The harder you push the spring down, the greater the force with which it bounces back. But a weak spring is a more appropriate analogy for the economy, for when it is pushed too hard, it may simply remain there if its restorative forces are destroyed. Second, governments as a rule should not focus on price stability, only price stability. This is simply not appropriate. In countries where inflation is already moderate or low, concerted policy efforts to reduce it further at the margin, say 2% per annum, may yield only small benefits but impose large costs because it squeezes employment in the short term and dampens growth in the medium term. The problem is that in developing countries, even under normal circumstances, there is a pro-cyclical pattern to macroeconomic policy. If our objective, and I conclude, Chair, is to accelerate poverty reduction and strengthen welfare policies, the time has come to dispense with these shibboleths that are embodied in orthodox macroeconomics. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So in case it wasn't known to you, my job was to protect your time. And so this is the moment, hopefully you can interrogate and engage with the excellent panelists. I think, give them a round of applause again. I think it was an excellent set of inputs. I will completely resist from summarizing what I think were some nuggets that I picked up from each of the speakers. So I think the floor is now open. We have at least 20 minutes for questions from the floor, and there are roving mics, so we'll take... And please, could you introduce yourself and the institution you're from, and hopefully keep the questions brief. So we've got one here and one at the back.
Thank you. This is Salim Rahan from Bangladesh, and excellent panel, excellent discussion. My small query about, I fully agree with what most of the points what you've said, but what I thought that probably one part was missing, and probably could elaborate a little bit on that. I fully agree on the fiscal aspect, what Professor Deepak Nayyar said, that the kind of challenges developing countries are facing, and even the little bit poorer developing countries. For example, Bangladesh, with a very low tax to GDP ratio, how can, there is a little incentive to spend more on the social protection or health or education. But I was more interested to know about the kind of serious institutional challenges these countries are facing, and even whatever envelope they have in respect to the, given the fiscal constraint, they can't really even spend properly because of serious leakages, institutional problems in the social protection system. So I was curious to know what is your experience and what would be your suggestion to improve that institutional aspect. Thank you.
Okay, the question at the back. We'll take 2 or 3 questions. One right at the back. It's the wall.
Garance Nico from Georgetown University. Thinking a little bit more about the crisis that is experienced in many developed countries, some element of thinking about the support and the safety net that are given, isn't it important to empower the organization of the desired recipient? That is, in many developed countries, we see a bit of a crisis of politicians or organizations that are trying to design policies to help some constituents, are not actually empowering the constituent themselves, and then the constituents themselves might actually help electing evil powers, as was discussed. And, you know, it used to be the case that unions created a big source of power, but now with jobs being more flexible, maybe not fixed for life, maybe it's very important to create organizations that are giving political power to the not workers via one industry, but actually allow workers, wherever they are, to be empowered and to be organized.
Thank you. Behind you, the gentleman right at the back.
Hi, my name is Leandro de Magalhães. I'm at the University of Bristol. I think I'd like to pick up two things, just one, sort of not contradictions, but one was the fall in poverty to 9% that we described, and sort of the rise of precariat and I missed the word now, but the other one is we were told, when asked in India, they wanted a job. And now we're also told that maybe universal transfers to everyone might be the policy. So those two contradictions, I'd like to hear more about those. Not contradictions, but yeah. Thank you.
Okay, there's one right in front here, second row.
Thank you. This is Dr. Nasir Iqbal from Pakistan, Institute of Development Economics, Pakistan. So there are two fundamental changes occurred within last 5 years. One is this COVID that gave a lot of thinking on this existing social protection system. And the second is the AI. So keeping in view these two events that cause a lot of disruption, one on the employment side, and the other is the reversal of the poverty. So then how we can be sure that the tomorrow would be safe with the existing social protection system? If not, then what are the alternative models that we really have to think about that? The one lesson that I learned is it's a solution linked with the market economy, it's the solution linked with the growth. But the dependency on this highly assistant-based model would not work. So these are the two things that really need to be incorporated when we are devising a revised social protection system. One, what is the learning from the crisis, especially the COVID? The second, AI. Thank you.
Okay. And we have two more, and then I think we'll go back to the panel. So there's one right at the back and one in front here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Leila Latif from the Committee of Fiscal Studies at the University of Nairobi. I've really enjoyed listening to the experiences you've shared. It gives us a lot of insight. But my question is, what really is the role of multinational corporations in all this, particularly when they're negotiating with a hard stand for countries to give them incentives, which turn out to be quite harmful, and then you get to see like developing country governments struggling to provide this very needed social protection measures. So your insight on that would be helpful.
My name is Abhirup Mukhopadhyay from the Indian Statistical Institute in New Delhi. I'm also a UNU visiting scholar. So my question is regarding a dimension I think a lot of you have alluded to in some way, but not directly, which is that many of our developing countries are getting old, right? So we are thinking about work, the young, but I mean, Latin America, South Africa, many states of India. How should we think about social protection in the context of the elderly? In states which are young, for example, in India, the sheer number of old is also large. So you could also think of them as a minority group which cannot really dictate policy towards itself, right? So how NREGS, you know, various kinds of pension schemes, these really haven't taken, I mean, pensions haven't taken off. I don't know what, I mean, Aruna can tell us how NREG interacts with the elderly. What are these kind of plans we have for the elderly? Also in South Africa, you have a more formalized sector. How do you think about giving social protection to the elderly and also grow at the same time and not have employment growth for the young? And, you know, it would be nice to hear your comments on that.
Okay, so we have six really good inputs and questions. We're going to go to the panel sequentially, or you can mix it up. And then I'm going to go back to the audience. Luis Felipe.
Thank you. So these are all complex questions, so it's difficult to answer in detail. We can continue offline after the meeting, but after the session. But one point I want to make is when I talked about growth, invest and insure, one of the key aspects of the new, at least the new strategy in the World Bank is precisely what was mentioned before, which is putting jobs at the center of poverty reduction, the creation of jobs. So in a way, we are told now in the bank, our job is to help governments create jobs. And that is very important because if that is the focus precisely when we talk about growth that generates high productivity jobs, and that's the only way, sustainable way to get people out of poverty, then we have to think of the other aspects as a function of that. And that's what I would like to reflect more. So the investments that are done in the second element of the strategy, which is related to as I said, education, health, and so on, and very important, all the aspects of what I call the circulatory system in the economy that creates the possibilities for firms to grow and to demand certain types of skills. And the social protection system has to be seen as an integrated part of that same effort. So if we don't see the welfare system in a way that is consistent with fiscal policy and with understanding the impact of this welfare system in the dynamics of the labor market, we are going to be, fragmenting the thinking about the policy. We have to really think of the fiscal policy and the social protection system as instruments that feed into the dynamics of a labor market that actually generates the demand for certain type of skills and allows firms to grow, and in that sense, productive firms to grow, and in that sense, generate employment that is needed. So it's not only growth in the sense of, for example, if we think of some countries that have had a lot of difficulties reducing poverty. We see, for example, in Africa, the elasticity that we see from growth to poverty reduction is lower than in other regions. Part of that is related to high levels of inequality, but that also is related to growth that is led or driven by extractive industries that are more capital intensive, that do not generate, don't have the multiplier effect in creating jobs or the backward linkages that are needed to create more jobs. So that is an essential part of understanding what is the pattern of growth that will allow us to create these jobs that are needed to lift people out of poverty. And what was mentioned at the end, and with this I close on the demographics, is very, very important. If we look at the projections and we see the composition of the population, the people between 15 and 40 years old 20 years from now will be mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. So this will be the youngest part of the world. And the amount of jobs that we need to create in that part of the world to lift these people out of poverty is, I would even say, unrealistic at this moment if we don't do things in a very different way. And on the fiscal system, just to say that right now there are concerns about debt, the level of debt globally, the trade policy that is introducing a lot of uncertainty, of course the climate shocks and so on. So there are different elements of tension or that introduce a level of uncertainty that make the growth prospects pretty bad. And certainly the fiscal situation has to be understood. Now, I think Bangladesh is an extreme, 7% of GDP in tax collection, right? So it's very difficult that our government can do that. We can only hope that under the leadership of Dr. Yunus, the society can come up with a new social pact. But it's a complicated situation in that specific case.
Okay, I will address three questions because time is scarce. First, Salim, you asked about the institutional weaknesses of governments and exchequers in developing countries. The point is that fiscal rigidities sometimes become a pretext for governments. Yeah? There is room to create fiscal flexibility even within the institutional constraints that there are. But the point I was stressing is that you have governments pursuing orthodox macroeconomic policies that actually make the living conditions of people much harder. So we need to correct macroeconomic policies in terms of the impact they have on people, just as we should not simply make fiscal rigidity an exogenous constraint. There is flexibility, even in the poorest countries. Second question, what is the role of transnational corporations in creating employment? I wish there was a straightforward answer. Much depends on the country you live in, and much depends on the sector in which the transnational corporations come. Insofar as transnational corporations have moved through global value chains into labor-intensive manufactured exports, that has been concentrated in relatively few countries, particularly in East and Southeast Asia. But its geographical spread is not extensive, not in Africa, not much in Latin America. That's one thing. The other thing we need to recognize is that a lot of transnational corporation investment in developing countries is investment in natural resources, which is capital intensive, technology intensive, and does not actually create employment. A lot of this investment is not even greenfield investment, it's brownfield investment. It's not adding to employment opportunities. So the reality is very mixed. I think the question you ask is an important question. China's population has already stopped growing, and its workforce will begin to decline at a more rapid rate soon, as fertility rates decline. India will also reach its peak population by 2060, but we are beginning to see a decline in fertility rates in parts of India. So aging populations are going to be a problem because a smaller number of producers is going to have to support a larger number of consumers. Now, I believe that in this, macroeconomics will play a critical role, because you have to develop either income support systems or social protection systems or pension systems that will support those who have retired, those who are beginning to age. I think this is a question which almost no government in the developing world is even beginning to think about. Not yet. It's a problem that people in Japan think about. I'm not sure, Justin may have a better answer, whether China is thinking of, at the government macro level, on how to bring about, how to respond to this changing demographic transition. Let me stop.
Thank you. I just a few remarks on some of the questions. The first, I think that we really need to be focusing on the future. It's always said that generals are very good at winning the last war. They tend to have the tactics for dealing with the past, but we must realize that we're facing a very different world that's evolving. And it's being affected, among other things, not only by the threat of extinction, which is uppermost in many of our minds, but also a technological revolution, which is thoroughly revolutionizing the labor market, among anything else. We will not have a future in which jobs are the same as our conceptualization of jobs in the past. We have a jobs fetish, but actually under rentier capitalism, the returns to labor have been declining everywhere, and as a result, we're going to see a changing character of the labor market in which more and more labor is done online. It's done in cloud labor. It's done in AI form. And we're going to have to find a way of redistributing the income that is flowing to the owners of the technology. We have an intellectual property rights system which is thoroughly conducive to increasing inequality as we sit here and increasing insecurity for the majority. That's the context. The second thing, I think we must escape from the idea of selectivity and targeting and conditionality. Renana Jabvala, who's a close friend, and I wrote an article some years ago called Clogged Pipes. And one thing we learned from Richard Titmuss from back in the 50s is that benefits that are only for the poor are invariably poor benefits. That we have to learn. We have poverty traps, precarity traps, clogged pipes, exclusivity problems, etc. The point about empowering, I'd like to make one comment, which is when we did our big pilots in Madhya Pradesh, we did it with SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, and we divided areas that we provided a basic income where SEWA was not working, and we provided basic income where SEWA was working. And the interesting thing was that where SEWA was working, the empowering effect meant that the positive benefits of the basic income, particularly on schooling, was stronger. The same we found in Namibia. Now, the last point I want to mention, if I may, which is that I think we should distinguish between structural changes in social protection and dealing with emergencies. Emergencies are classic disasters, post-conflict, and so on. In the last 3 years, I've been privileged to be invited to prepare an emergency basic income scheme for Nepal, Ukraine, and last but most tellingly for me, for Palestine, if ever this disgusting system of genocide is ended. It's feasible to do it in context of emergency. It's essential to introduce the capacity to recover by people on the ground. And I think that the UN and wider should be at the forefront of developing emergency schemes for social protection in such areas. Thank you very much.
The questions have been widespread. I'll take up a few of them. Let me begin by the question that was asked about the elderly. The elderly is not one category. I would like to say that it's divided by class in India, by caste, by location, by what you did for your living. So to talk of the elderly in India as a group, I think would be a misnomer. I think I'd like to speak about the large numbers of people who have given their best years of their life actually physically building the country and what happens to them. The government of India has a pension scheme of 200 rupees a month, and it has not been questioned. Any welfare scheme that talks of under, how many dollars would that be? 200 rupees would be $2.50 a month. It's a laugh. So actually, old age and the problems of old age are basically access to health, access to food, and access to some kind of basic support. In Rajasthan, we have been able to fight and get together a basic pension right. And in that pension right, we have raised that 200 rupees, which is $2.50, to about 1,250 rupees with an increase, 15% increase every year. Actually, you have to break up all these problems. All the problems that we've talked about have to be broken up into their constituent parts. None of them can be dealt with at one level because the reasons for all this are very different. So in breaking it up, we also dealt with the issue of the guaranteed income, basic and guaranteed income, instead of talking about it again as one program, we broke it up into the various components. So for a woman or a man who's worked as a labor worker, then it's pension. If you have done and you're continuing to do physical work, then an increase in your number of work days that you have. If you're a senior citizen, you get a pension. If you are a person with disability, you get a pension. And if you're a single woman, you get a pension. Actually, I find that most of these issues have to be disaggregated to be resolved. Now, in the case of the fallout of all these programs, what are our parameters of assessing whether things are done? We talk about investment. If you talk about investment in India to most people in many of the states, they are worried because investment means taking over forests, it means taking over water sources, it means taking over all the various things which are fundamental to ecology as well as to the sustenance of the planet. And we are talking about approaches to growth and equity about tomorrow, but what about today? So they're concerned with today and what happens today. So actually, we have to look at programs that will today contribute to a more equal access to everything, to address climate change, to look at equal empowerment of women, and in the case of MG and REG, it established a floor minimum wage. You'll have to look at migration being reduced. You'll have to look at watershed and other assets being controlled by people rather than by government, which then decides what to do with it, and a social society network. So I think old age, like anything else, has to be disaggregated. And I also think investment, well, it's for me a very difficult topic. It is not something that I can dismiss in one word. What kind of investment, where the investment, how the investment, who will benefit from the investment, what will be the kind of labor, what will be the rules of the labor. And today, everything is on contract. We have gig workers everywhere, whether it's Amazon or Uber or any one of these programs of employment, you're on contract for just that one piece of work. So are we looking at it? In India, actually, as I said, we've looked at gig workers' relationship with work, and in one other session, I think we'll be talking a little more about how the gig workers' law has been formulated and passed by 2 governments. Actually, that's why I think this is a very important conference, because we have to look at every single aspect of the economy instead of doing broad generalizations, which will be okay. There have to be ideological positions we take and principles on which we all have to agree, but each issue has to be addressed separately.
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions, and it's a privilege to hear you all. First of all, I think it's very relevant, very important, the question about the conditions within the state to implement transformative policies. And we have advocated for improving technical, operational planning and prospective capacities within the state. And that's one of the things ECLAC is advocating for within Latin America. But I think it applies elsewhere. And also to look at the normative frameworks is crucial. The operational, organizational, and financial issues, involved in policy planning is fundamental. Look at human resources, and all of those factors are key and crucial to finally explain the effectiveness of social policies. So when we provide, for instance, technical assistance to countries, we look for both issues, like the impact of the design of policies, the evidence that we have, but also work with the persons that are implementing these policies and consider all these aspects that are crucial to make policies at the end of the day work, many times in very precarious conditions on the part of states, of the implementers. So one have to think of all these aspects. And we advocate also for the sustainability of social policies, and that involves increasing coverage, increasing sufficiency of entitlements, and also being quite responsible about financial considerations and financial sustainability in order to plan those transformations. There was also a question question concerning whether we were speaking about persons, I understood as that, persons living in extreme poverty, but then we're living in a world of high vulnerability. And that's the idea of actually advocating for universal social protection systems. Universal social protection systems imply that everyone must have access to social protection instruments and policies. So it's very important to design policies that are integrative, that are complementary, and that have very clear goals. They might be different instruments, cash transfers, or basic income, or services, expanding health, expanding education services, expanding access to services, and expanding also labor inclusion. But there must be a comprehensive approach in order for universal social protection to be achieved. I agree very much with what Professor Ryder said about emergency social protection policies. And we believe that we need to prepare for emergencies and design in advance measures to prevent impacts when emergencies hit. We must also prepare for all the transformations that are occurring in parallel, and that this is absolutely paramount to what we're living. Technological transformations, demographic transition, violence, climate crisis, all at once is very relevant, and systems must be prepared for that, as well as confronting the shortcomings that we already have. And just one message about the COVID-19 pandemic and what we learned from that. We could identify over 500 measures that were non-contributory measures that were implemented by governments between 2020 and 2021. A third of those were new emergency measures, which shows a flexibility, but also shows the level of unpreparedness that we were confronting. Finally, just to mention pensions and social protection for older persons. We also believe that you need to have a specific focus and design several coexisting policies. Care policies are fundamental, not only for older persons that require special care and attendance, but for several populations that compose care policies, improving health systems. But in terms of pensions, we believe it's very important to improve the complementarity between contributory and non-contributory pension systems. And that starts from the youth onwards. And that's why we're advocating also for a greater articulation between labor inclusion policies and other traditional social protection policies to improve formalization and enhance, as long as it's possible, contributory social protection. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So I did promise a second round, but that was conditional on time. So I think we will, and the one person I was going to give a question in the front has graciously said she doesn't have to ask her question. So with that, I think we will close the panel, but please join me in again thanking the panelists. Oh, sorry, Aruna wanted to say something. My apologies. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I just missed one question which was asked about corruption in government, and this touches upon many things. For those of us who think we don't have an interest in governance, we're making a fatal mistake, because we all have to see how governments run. And one of the big issues that has been part of all our campaigns is, do we have to look at, manage, and see how governments run? Because if we don't have that capacity to see that, then whether it's corruption or whether it's impunity, whether it's violence, whether it's oligarchies that are coming up, the kind of communal agendas that our governments are coming up, we have no say. So how do you participate in government? And I think no matter what campaign we run, whether it's for welfare or for anything else, we have to have a component of it which will fight for democratic rights to say what my government shall do for me, no matter whether it is what I want or whether it's something else I want my government to do. But ultimately, we'll have to have the right to decide how my government will make policies, not only in relation to poverty, but in relation to general aspects of secularism, of equality, of liberty, of the right to freedom of expression, because without that, my demand will be completely suppressed. And that's today's the world. So I think any program that does not bring in this concept or component into its debate and discussion, to me, is going to be very limited.
Thank you. No further words from me, just to say thank you to the panelists. I think it's been an excellent start to the conference, and tea is ready for you outside. Thanks.